Hey, well, what's up, guys? Welcome back to The Collision. Daniel here to talk about a very interesting new film, Freud's Last Session. I've seen it, so let's talk about it. So it's important to preserve history, but sometimes it's just a lot more fun to play around with it. And that's what this film does. Freud's Last Session is kind of like a fictional imagining of a conversation between the theologian author C.S. Lewis as well as psychologist Sigmund Freud. And let me say just right off the top that I really enjoyed this film. I found this one of the maybe the most fascinating films that I have had the chance to review this year. I think it is elevated by two very strong performances, and it is a rare film that does sort of aim to stimulate the mind and not to sort of activate the heart, and also to explore some pretty big ideas without ever kind of coming across like it's preaching or sort of forcing one perspective down your throat. And I think despite some kind of some subplots and stuff that I do think gets in the way, that does sort of stall the momentum that we'll get into, I think overall this is a film that does provide a very captivating portrait of just sort of respectful disagreement that seems very rare in our polarized world today. Let me also mention that I actually had the chance to sit down and chat with the director as well as with Matthew Goode, who's the actor that plays C.S. Lewis in this film. So we'll drop the link to that conversation in the comment section. I encourage you to check out that as well. But let's get into the meat of this review. So kind of like imaginative sort of philosophical dialogues aren't uncommon in philosophical writing. Obviously, like Plato did that all the time with Socrates in his own writing, but it is a very novel kind of original concept for a film. And I think sort of the cinematic approach might lead some people to just assume that it's sort of a more evangelistic, kind of faith-based agenda. But this doesn't seem like a film that is all that interested in kind of trying to convert viewers to either one of these kind of differing worldviews and opinions. And instead, this movie very much emphasizes just the importance of being open-minded and kind of willing to enter into those dialogues and grapple with some of life's big questions. Because there's a great quote kind of at the end of this film where Freud says to Lewis, "What were we thinking? It was madness to think that we could solve the greatest mystery of all time." To which C.S. Lewis responds, "Oh, there's a greater madness, not to think of it at all." And I think that really does summarize sort of the approach that this film is taking. This is not like a God's Not Dead type movie where sort of a valiant Christian apologist just sort of slam dunks on some bumbling atheist, but neither is it sort of a mainstream Hollywood film where a very sort of sophisticated, atheist or scientist is just sort of running, circles around some anti-intellectual Christian, because the film very much does sort of present both of these characters and their respective worldviews and kind of put it in the best light, in the most sort of articulate light. I think probably like a lot of real world debates, audiences are likely going to come away from the theater feeling that their own sort of representative got the upper hand and won the debate. But at least according to the movie, the message sort of all throughout is that the real victory, like the real accomplishment in this is just that conversation took place at all. And for a 2-hour movie, that focus is primarily, almost exclusively on just two men having a conversation. In order for that setup to work, it really has to be elevated by some dynamic acting. And I think the cast in this film is definitely up for the challenge. Anthony Hopkins is superb. He plays Sigmund Freud, and obviously you expect him to be good, and he is good. And he is able to sort of balance just sort of the confidence as well as some of the frailty that comes just with, age and kind of mortality. And kind of on the other hand, from that, Matthew Goode portrays C.S. Lewis. And although the character is more restrained, a bit more passive compared to Freud, I think he's great in this. C.S. Lewis is one of my heroes, so obviously I'm a little sensitive to how they portray him, but I think he does a great job in this. The character is sort of more at the beginning of his career, so he's not yet in the timeline like the well-known, renowned apologist and intellectual that he'll one day become. And all the seeds of sort of Lewis's classic arguments like the trilemma and Sunshuk and sort of all these things that we associate with C.S. Lewis, those are there, although they're not quite articulated as fully formed ideas as they will one day be. But overall, Goode as Lewis is very winsome. He is sort of unflappable, and I think he is able to kind of capture some of the subtleties of just Lewis's almost sort of boyish faith. Let me also say, despite a movie that heavily relies on the dialogue, this is also just a beautiful film. A lot of the setting takes place in Sigmund Freud's home, and they kind of move around his office in various places. But just sort of like the way the shots are framed, and then there's like the color palette, and it's a gorgeous film to look at. And sort of the scenes that do get out of that setting are very just sort of immersive into that time period. And this movie is not aiming to be like a biopic that just sort of gives a lot of the historical background of these characters. Very much it's just sort of focused on them as vehicles for their worldviews and for the discussion. But there are several flashbacks for both of these characters throughout, which include sort of the big moments like Lewis's own conversion, then like his famous conversation with J.R.R. Tolkien, and his experiences fighting in the trenches and the war. And I think sometimes sort of the non-linear these flashbacks do come as almost sort of some unwelcome intrusions into the debate. But I think overall, these shots are important kind of thematically in order to sort of ground these abstract ideas into sort of the more complex and very much human lived experiences of both these characters. But unfortunately, not everything about this sort of imaginative verbal sparring match works quite as effectively. And I think if this film has one major fault, it's just that it doesn't always seem to trust that sort of that the stimulating dialogue going on will be enough to hold the attention of viewers. And kind of because of that, this film is kind of constantly interrupted by this is a superfluous subplot involving Anna Freud, who is Sigmund Freud's daughter, and kind of her own journey of wrestling with her sexuality as like a closeted lesbian, and her unhealthy attachments to her father. And these scenes with her character, although some of them do sort of tangentially relate to the conversation that's going on between Lewis and Freud, too often it feels almost like an ill-advised attempt to sort of smuggle in an Anna Freud biopic into an almost a completely different kind of movie. And she also just doesn't have enough to do, because it does feel like the filmmakers at times almost are just trying to come up. They've sort of introduced this character but don't have much of consequence for her to do. So they sort of send her on errands, like she's frantically trying to get medicine for her father, which turns out to be totally inconsequential to the story. And I think the actress herself, she gives a good performance. Her character just isn't necessary in the movie that they're trying to tell. And I think kind of the decision to give her so much attention just comes across more frustrating. It seems like often when Freud and Lewis are just sort of entering into a very exciting kind of new territory in their debate, all of a sudden we cut away to see Anna Freud kind of bickering with her lover, or teaching a class, or trying to buy medicine, and kind of rather than adding to the story that's being told, sort of this subplot continually seems to sort of derail and kind of lose momentum. As far as content to consider, things going on the surface of this film, there's really not a whole lot. Language, I counted about 4 minor profanities, as well as a couple uses of the word bloody, because these are British characters after all. Violence, there's no real violence. There is a flashback that takes place with C.S. Lewis's experience in the war, and one of his friends is killed in an explosion, and you sort of see him bloodied, and you see C.S. Lewis bloodied, but there's nothing gratuitous or over the top in that way. As you might expect from a movie about Sigmund Freud, probably where the most content stuff comes in is with sexuality, although there's still not a whole lot going on here as well. There is like a dreamlike, almost like a trance scene involving Sigmund Freud that is very symbolic of a lot of his theories and kind of fears and things going on internally. And in that kind of dreamlike scene, he does see his daughter Anna and her female lover in bed together, and they're both closed, but their bodies are sort of intertwined, and you do almost hear some like faint panting or some like kind of sexual noises in the background. And kind of continuing from that scene, there's also some statues, various statues that are nude, although they're sort of all they're covered up in various ways, and some of these statues do sort of become animated and move, and it's very much intended to represent sort of some of the sexual philosophies and kind of the worldview of Freud. And then obviously there's Anna's own sexuality as a lesbian in this film, with sort of her lover is very much a central part of her subplot. And maybe the last thing is just, again, this is Freud, so the characters do talk about sex. That does become one of the debate topics, and kind of going back and forth, and just the nature of things like homosexuality and just sex itself. And that way, and Freud does, he talks about a boy playing piccolo alone in his bedroom, which is very much a euphemism for masturbation. Maybe just the last content thing is just characters are shown kind of smoking and drinking as well. But overall, there's just really not a ton of content stuff to be worried about in this film. As far as things going on beneath the surface, sort of worldview, kind of, philosophical stuff, for this movie, a lot of that stuff is happening on the surface. The sort of the worldviews and the debate are very much the point of the film. But I do think kind of beneath, kind of at a deeper, more subtle layer to that, this film does seem like it's making a case that kind of what we believe, like who we become in our worldview, is very much shaped or at least informed by our life experiences, and perhaps in more ways than we even would like to admit. And probably where this becomes the most clear is when it comes to sort of the philosophical problem of suffering and kind of why does a good God allow so much pain in the world? Because the characters sort of on the surface, they debate that and they have their own kind of intellectual arguments, but then you sort of see kind of glimpses that of more the complexity of those questions on a more kind of human level. Because you see Sigmund Freud, who's very much, a self-professing, just all about the evidence. He's a scientist and he's just about data. But when it comes to this question and kind of his own experiences losing his daughter and his grandson through various illness, you sort of see some of that emotion, kind of his guard gets let down and he does let some anger out. And he, at one point, he tells C.S. Lewis that sort of he wishes the cancer that was in his mouth would have been in his brain. And he says, so I could hallucinate about God and seek my bloody vengeance on him. And it's a really powerful and kind of interesting moment in this film that does demonstrate that kind of Freud's skepticism towards God is rooted in something beyond just sort of science and evidence. And the flashback scenes are very effective in this way as well, because they do kind of help paint a more complete portrait that these are two very kind of complicated individuals, and it does sort of provide some context to their worldview. There's a back and forth between these guys where Lewis says, "You are a walking contradiction," and Freud responds, "Well, I'm human, inherently flawed." And the film does explore some of those sort of contradictions and just the fact that sometimes what we believe in our heart and kind of what we say and think we believe in our head is a lot more messy than we might think of ourselves or be willing to admit. And what kind of like our circumstances, obviously influence our beliefs and sort of how we see the world. They don't fully determine them. And I think this film does present several interesting parallels of sort of, between these two characters and how they interpret similar instances like complicated relationships with their fathers, or just the imagery of like a forest and kind of how they see the same situation and yet go on very diverging and different paths. But I think overall, just as Christians watching this film, this is, I think, a powerful reminder just about the complexity of belief, and I think the importance to look beyond just sort of the intellectual ideas on the surface and see sort of the complicated, flawed, sinful human beings kind of beneath the surface. So in the end, I like this film a lot. I think, despite some of the subplots and stuff that I just thought was unnecessary and kind of stalled some of the momentum that was building in this film, it is a captivating film. I think it's a worthwhile film. And obviously neither character, historically is able to change their mind at the end. But kind of despite that, sort of the closing scenes in this film does seem to indicate that sort of both these characters have very much kind of been edified and benefited just from having that honest, sort of mutually respective conversation. I think as Christians, or really as anyone, I think it is a valuable reminder that we'd likely all benefit from such sort of open-minded and just sort of respectful dialogues about the big questions in life. But hey, I'd love to hear what you guys think. If you guys check out this film, jump in the comment section and let me know what you thought of it. If you enjoyed it as much as I did, if you had some issues with it, and just sort of what you thought of this whole concept of, a fictional dialogue, and whether, you'd like to see more films like this. Love to hear that. Again, if you haven't done so, I encourage you guys to subscribe to our channel, become a Collider. I would love to have you be a part of what we're doing here with movie reviews and live streams and just a bunch of other fun stuff. But most of all, guys, thank you for watching. Stay safe, have a great Christmas, and continue to collide with your world for Christ.